This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What happened didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with paperwork. Quiet, procedural, filed on time. For decades, power in this country relied on one assumption, that if you delay long enough, the system blinks first. That chaos buys immunity. That courts warn but never force. That assumption just cracked. Not loudly, not theatrically, but in a way that collapses timelines and removes exits. What you are watching is not punishment. It is compression. Multiple systems, long kept apart, suddenly moving at once. When that happens, instability isn't the threat. Acceleration is, if you want to understand what is unfolding, not as spectacle, but as structure, stay with me. Because once this process starts, it does not slow down to explain itself. And what comes next was designed for moments no one wanted to reach. That is where we are now. And that's where this story actually begins. You've been told this system is controlled by elections, by personalities, by outrage cycles that burn hot and fade fast. That's the comforting version. In reality, the system runs on timing, on delay, on the quiet belief that power can always outlast consequence. Institutions learn to move slowly on purpose. Courts warn, legislatures debate, investigations stretch. Everyone waits for the clock to do the work for them. And for a long time, it did. Not because the system was weak, but because it was cautious. It assumed restraint would be returned in kind. That assumption shaped everything. How laws were enforced, how limits were tested, how far defiance could go without triggering response. But here's the shift you're watching now. Control no longer belongs to the loudest actor in the room. It belongs to whoever collapses time the moment timelines compress, leverage changes hands. Delay stops being a shield, and procedure becomes a weapon. That shift is subtle. And once you see it, you can't unsee where this is heading. Because the system didn't break, it recalibrated. And the recalibration is still underway. For a long time, this change didn't look like a change at all. It looked like patience, like restraint, like institutions choosing not to escalate. Before, defiance was treated as noise. A tweet, a press conference, a provocation that would burn out on its own. The system absorbed it, normalized it, adjusted around it. Warnings replaced enforcement. Deadlines stretched. Violations became footnotes, and slowly, something dangerous happened. The exception became the baseline. Before, ignoring a court carried consequence. Now, it carried delay. Before, intimidation triggered response. Now, it triggered another warning. Nothing snapped. Nothing announced itself as a crisis. That's the part people miss. Systems rarely fail all at once. They fail by teaching bad behavior that it will be tolerated. Until one day, tolerance stops working. Because the longer defiance goes unanswered, the more expensive enforcement becomes. What you're seeing now is not a sudden crackdown. It's a correction after prolonged drift. And corrections don't restore the past. They overshoot, which means the next move doesn't explain what happened before. It responds to everything that was allowed to happen. And that response has already begun. Then the system flinched. Not because it wanted to, because it had to. A line that had been bent too many times finally held. And when it did, the response was not symbolic. It was procedural, documented, irreversible. This wasn't a dramatic showdown. It was a file transmitted, a record compiled, evidence stacked in sequence. Warnings stopped being warnings the moment they were preserved. Screenshots, transcripts, timestamps. Every action that once lived in the gray space of rhetoric was converted into something colder, something harder to dismiss. This wasn't escalation for effect. It was escalation for containment, because when a system realizes that tolerance is producing risk, it doesn't argue. It documents that's what changed here. Behavior that once created delay suddenly created proof. And proof doesn't de-escalate conflict. It narrows options. Once the record is complete, there is no negotiation with tone, no recalibration through messaging. There is only movement. And once movement begins inside a system designed to move slowly, it moves faster than anyone expects. That's the moment we've crossed. And the next piece explains why there's no reverse gear. Here's the mechanism most people never see while it's working. The system doesn't respond to outrage. It responds to exposure. As long as defiance stays performative, it remains politically manageable. But the moment it becomes evidentiary, control shifts. Documentation does something rhetoric cannot. It freezes behavior in time. It strips away intent claims. It turns patterns into structure. This is where power quietly changes hands. Those who benefit from delay rely on ambiguity, on endless interpretation, on the hope that exhaustion replaces accountability. But records don't get tired. They don't forget context. They don't respond to intimidation. And once evidence is formally transferred, it no longer belongs to the person who generated it. It belongs to the process. That's the hidden cost of normalization. Every tolerated violation accumulates interest. And when the bill comes due, it's paid all at once. The damage doesn't land on the architect of defiance alone. It spreads outward to enablers, to intermediaries, to anyone who carried the behavior forward. That's why this phase feels different, not louder, heavier, because the system isn't trying to win an argument anymore. It's closing a loop. And once loops close, they don't reopen politely. Now the pace changes. Shorter timelines, tighter windows, less room to maneuver. What once unfolded over months is now measured in hours. Statements trigger responses. Responses generate records. Records accelerate decisions. There is no pause between action and consequence anymore. No buffer. No cooling off period. Every move feeds the next mechanism. Every escalation narrows the field. This is how systems behave when they decide delay is no longer safe. Security hardens. Procedures activate. Contingencies that existed only on paper suddenly become operational. And here's the dangerous part. Acceleration creates pressure not just on institutions, but on people inside them. Mistakes happen faster. Overreactions become tempting. Signals get misread. The system knows this. That's why it moves anyway. Because the risk of waiting has finally outweighed the risk of acting at this stage, outcomes don't hinge on persuasion. They hinge on endurance. Who can stay inside the process as it tightens? Because once momentum replaces discretion, the system doesn't ask who's ready. It only asks what's next. And what's next isn't abstract anymore. This is where it reaches you, not as theory, not as headlines, as lived consequence. When systems accelerate, they don't just reshape power. They change daily life. You feel it in the background tension, in the way institutions speak more carefully, in the security you didn't used to notice, now suddenly visible. Uncertainty has weight, and you're carrying some of it because when rules are tested this openly, everyone starts recalculating. What holds? What breaks? What happens if it doesn't stop here? That quiet unease isn't panic. It's awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable because it forces a question we're not used to answering. What happens if the system actually follows through? Not symbolically, not rhetorically, procedurally. If you're still here, it's because you sense this matters beyond one moment, beyond one figure, beyond one outcome. Stay with me. Not for resolution, for clarity. Because what comes next isn't about accountability alone. It's about what kind of pressure this system can absorb before it changes permanently. And that pressure is no longer contained. This doesn't stay contained. Systems never do. When institutional stress reaches a certain level, it propagates outward. across borders, across assumptions. Allies watch closely when timelines collapse in Washington. Not for drama, for signals. They measure reliability, predictability, whether commitments hold when pressure rises. Adversaries do the same differently. They probe, they test, they look for hesitation disguised as deliberation. This is how domestic acceleration becomes global consequence. Markets don't wait for speeches. Security planners don't wait for elections. They react to motion, and right now, motion is visible. The old belief was that internal conflict weakens a system slowly. What we're learning is that sudden enforcement shocks can do it faster or stabilize it just as quickly. No one knows which direction this goes yet. That uncertainty is the signal, because once a system shows it can still enforce its own limits, every external actor recalculates risk. That recalculation is happening in real time, and it doesn't come with announcements. It comes with silence, with contingency planning, with decisions made quietly ahead of confirmation. That's why this moment feels larger than it should, because it is. And the next phase determines whether this pressure diffuses or concentrates. From here, the system has three possible paths. None of them are clean. All of them accelerate something. The first is adjustment. Institutions absorb the shock, procedures hold. The system tightens, recalibrates, and survives. Changed, but intact. Authority reasserts itself quietly. Limits become real again. The second is erosion. Compliance happens on paper, not in spirit. Processes move, but legitimacy leaks. Every action is questioned. Every decision contested. The system functions, but trust thins out. Slowly, then suddenly. And then there's rupture. That's when pressure exceeds design, when enforcement triggers resistance instead of compliance, when acceleration produces backlash faster than institutions can absorb it. Not collapse, fragmentation. The danger is not choosing the wrong path. It's pretending the choice isn't happening. Because these paths aren't selected by speeches or votes alone. They're shaped by reactions, by restraint, by escalation, by what happens when power realizes it cannot rely on delay anymore. We're not at the end of this story. We're at the point where direction becomes visible, but not yet declared. And that makes the final stretch the most volatile of all. There is no clean ending here. No moment where the system exhales and everything returns to normal. Normal was the illusion. What you're watching is a structure deciding whether it still has gravity, whether rules still pull power back into line, or whether defiance has become lighter than consequence. Nothing about this guarantees stability. Enforcement never does. It only guarantees that the next phase will be different from the one that came before. If the system follows through, it proves something it hasn't proven in a long time. That delay is not immunity. That intimidation hardens institutions instead of freezing them. That procedure, once activated, does not negotiate. If it doesn't, the lesson spreads just as fast. Because systems teach even when they fail. So don't look away now. This is the moment where patterns lock in, where future actors learn what works. And what doesn't, stay with this story. Not for the outcome, but for the mechanism, because the next chapter won't announce itself as a crisis. It will arrive quietly, filed on time, and by the time it's obvious, the direction will already be set.